Good evening, and welcome to our continuing edition of Explorations in Savitri with our beloved Partook. We are now on page 281, The Heavens of the Ideal, that's Canto 12, in Book 2, the Book of the Traveler of the Worlds. And you wanted to
Yes, I
do
think,
about a few lines before that little
yeah,
break.
before the break.
Yeah, good.
Before the break.
Okay.
Because it connects with what follows.
Mm.
So these are worlds which have not yet felt our fall, meaning thereby that these higher states, eventually beings and energies, they came down and eventually entered the inconscient. So there are Godheads who have not experienced this fall. As we know, they were the second line, the original fall, four fell down into the creation. But subsequently, these gods have not experienced the fall. And it is, in one level, a privilege, at another level, a loss. Because by this loss, you gain something. So, for the gods to evolve, they have to take a human body, and which is very constricting for them. Happy the worlds that have not felt our fall, where will is one with truth and good with power. So, in our consciousness, it is, as we know, divided. Often people are good, but they don't have the will and they don't have the power to effectuate the goodness. So, they are good people, but they want somehow that the world should become good. But they don't have the power and the will to effectuate it. But in these worlds, knowledge is one with will. Of course, in the supramental world, it's one. What the vision sees, that the will creates. But in these worlds also, fairly high, nearing the overmind regions, yet not the division has taken place, which is the cause of the fall.
And Mother says that the first sign of the Superman will be power.
Yes, first sign of the Superman, because he has to safeguard. Impoverished not by earth mind's indigence, they keep God's natural breath of mightiness, His bare, spontaneous, swift intensities. They are such marvelous lines actually. You know, we human beings, always there is a dissociation between knowledge and action. First we have to laboriously think what to do. And then if we arrive at a conclusion that we should do like this, then we don't have the will. So we struggle all the time. But there is the spontaneity of the knowledge and the power to effectuate. There is no calculation, planning, and laborious thought process involved. So we have to move from the animal spontaneity to the divine spontaneity, but passing through a narrow phase of the humankind. Animal spontaneity is driven by the vital, and the God spontaneity by the intuition. But in between there is the mind, long and complicated passage. There is his great transparent mirror self, and there is sovereign autarky of bliss. So each being there is full of that ananda and the transparent mirror self. We don't have the transparent mirror, we have the distorted mirror, or the limited mirror, or the limiting mirror. The mind itself is a distorting mirror. So unlike those higher states where there is no such distortion, the soul sees what it is creating. There is no disparity between them, in which immortal natures have their part, heirs and co-sharers of divinity. Now this is interesting because what follows next is something very amazing. He through the ideals kingdoms moved at will. So now the first few lines are important because it gives a suggestion that those beings have not experienced this fall. But strangely, Ashupati, who is rising from the mud, has arrived in those kingdoms. We have these stories in the Puranas where through tapasya, people have arisen to the great heavens. Now, the difference is, as we will see, that these beings are fixed in their types. But Ashupati will go further and into the beyond. So this is what that's the beauty of this whole process through which we pass. He through the ideals kingdoms moved at will, accepted their beauty and their greatness bore, partook of the glories of their wonder fields, but passed nor stayed beneath their splendor's rule. So these are the great, we hear in Indian thought certain names of, Vaikuntha and Kailash, many such, Swarga, various kinds. Now, these again is see an interesting difference. Traditionally, in yogas which go beyond, like they are nihilistic yogas, you don't accept all these powers and splendors. But Ashupati accepts them
and then goes beyond them.
So Sri Aurobindo writes about the siddhis, and there is also a very nice aphorism where he says, great saints have performed miracles, greater saints have railed over them. But the greatest of them have both performed and railed over.
Yes.
So he speaks of siddhis and says that generally it is considered as distraction on the path of typical Vedantin yoga, it's considered a distraction. But Ashupati has to work out a possibility in the world. So every power that comes from every side he accepts. But he does not limit himself. It's a new approach altogether. All there was an intense but partial light. That's why he has to move further. This is not yet the total vision. In each a seraph-winged, high-browed idea, united all knowledge by one master thought, persuaded all action to one golden sense, all powers subjected to a single power, and made a world where it could reign alone, an absolute ideal's perfect home. So each of these gods have a whole empire. So there is a God of truth, God of justice, God of mercy, God of love, God of wisdom, and each one has their own empire. And they deal with whole creation based on that. Actually, if we read the four aspects of the mother, we'll see it. All of them have a different approach. So when it comes to Imperial Maheshwari, she is seated in the calm above the thinking mind. So all her actions are flowing from that wisdom and calm. So she is full of compassion. So even when she rejects, there is a kind of compassion which has gone into it. Whereas Kali, she is Mahakali, she is swift, impetuous. What she likes is straightforward action. Both are working toward the manifestation of truth, but in different ways.
But even she has love.
Yes, of course, very intense love. Or Mahalakshmi, her way is very different. She will just try to create beauty and harmony, and when she finds she is, the human heart is full of hatred and jealousies, it just withdraws and waits for the poison stuff to be thrown. And Mahasaraswati, she'll work into all the details. So all of them are working on the whole creation, but each in her own way.
But this line I'd like to ask you to expound on. United all knowledge by one master thought.
Yes. So let's take, for example, a child of Kali. That you will see here, it explains many things here. So a child of Kali, for him, only thing that matters is straightforwardness, frankness, truthfulness, honesty, things like that. And he will want only that in the world and build a world according to that. So whatever is other than that, it cannot understand. Whereas for another person, it be compassion, forgiveness, compassion. But a child of Kali, it's not forgiveness and compassion. Or rather, slaying is forgiveness and compassion. That's how it will come. or a child of Mahalakshmi, no, let's have harmony, 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 harmony. Everything should be harmonious. So that's how they pick up one thought, and based on that, all other things are subordinated. So other ideas, like for instance, punishment. If one asks Mahalakshmi, she will say, okay, if it helps in building harmony, if it prepares man for that love, but otherwise not. But for Mahakali, it's different. So each of them unites all other tendencies by one master impulsion. And many human beings who grow into vibhutis, they are like that. They pick up one strand and they are driven by one of these great goddesses and make that the master impulsion.
It's interesting that Mother said that on capital punishment.
Yeah.
She said, only if the soul is ready to go.
Yeah. Of course, she could see all this and go beyond.
Yes.
But this was one of the problems that many people don't understand within the ashram. At least I know some of the people who very clearly represented one clear line of advance and the another line of advance. And when they met each other or ever had a confrontation, you are reminded of what happened in the Puranas. That Saraswati and Lakshmi, they are quarreling with each other. Saraswati says knowledge is ultimate, and Lakshmi will say no, wealth is ultimate. Of course, that's bringing it down to vital level. And then they would have, all kinds of things. So this is how they unite with one master thought. Even in Ilion, it is very beautifully described that there are gods who are favoring certain types of movements, tendencies, and they have their own favorites. And there are others, they have their own favorites. So Apollo doesn't like Paris, because he says Apollo is by reason, very... whereas Paris is different. Paris is not a being of reason. He has his own reason, but he is largely a heart-centered human being. So Apollo doesn't like, whatever he has done. Because according to reason, it's not a right thing to do. But the law of love is very different. So the gods, but Zeus had decided. He says, no, Troy has to come down. That's the end of the story. So even we see the conversion of Achilles in Ilion, where Achilles, who is driven by the swiftness and force of Kali, changes into a being of compassion. It's there in Ilion. He is upgraded or takes a different route. Insignia of their victory and their faith, they offered to the traveler at their gates a quenchless flame or an unfading flower. So that's what we read. These are the two paths through which they are going. So they were given either this flame is the power, whereas the flower is that symbol of that love which is blossoming. So they are given the love, the fragrance, the beauty. So either of it they gave to the traveler, whichever route he had come from, through which he had come. They offered to the traveler at their gates a quenchless flame or an unfading flower, emblem of a high kingdom's privilege. So when these beings are offered, these human beings who travel and reach these states, or by rare grace, so these are the vibhuti, they become vibhuti. So it's given to them and it remains with them. They will accomplish things because that power of that Godhead stands behind them. Look at Shivaji. It is said that Shivaji was given now insignia. Now this is like Shivaji was given the sword of Bhavani. Now this is a quenchless flame that was lit in him for freedom overthrowing the Mughal Empire. You cannot quench it. So this young child from 12 nurtured this flame and come what may. Whether he is imprisoned, he is defeated, he doesn't have an army, but he will eventually win because behind him stands that power which has decided now that Mughal Empire shall be overthrown.
Sri Aurobindo said that neither he nor Mother ever came as avatars before.
Yes, so they were there
as
as
vibhutis.
Dantam, you see that.
Yes.
Quenchless flame, even on the guillotine he is saying that. And one of his friends, he in a way not dissed him, but like because he thought very differently. He thought more politically correctness and etc. But Danton was not like that. Red terror. He is like Kali, and he says, whatever you may have done, this idea is not going to die. And he goes to the gallows. So they represent, like Napoleon, represent one line of advance. Now these are vibhutis who have been chosen by, but here there is a traveler who has reached that point, and he can become a very conscious vibhuti, who is very conscious of the mission and the purpose, and it will constantly, that level, Godhead will keep feeding the flame and keep filling that fragrance inside. A glorious, shining angel of the way, presented to the seeking of the soul the sweetness and the might of an idea. So the flame and the rose, the sweetness and the might of an idea. Each deemed truth's intimate fount and summit force, the heart of the meaning of the universe, perfection's key, passport to paradise. For each of them, that summit idea was the ultimate. He would live according to that. I didn't care for other things. When all this was going on, the Auroville controversy and all the problem was going on. So Nalnida had put up in the name of Nalnida, someone put up a notice in the ashram. When Pranabda came to know of it, he walked to Nalnida and told him, what is this that you have allowed to put up? Now, because Nalnida is different. He is in knowledge, risen to those heights through knowledge. Pranabda has risen to those heights through a different energy altogether. So for him, all this is diplomacy. It should not be there. For him, it is either yes or no. So that is how we see, and it has happened within the ashram context. So much so that somebody asked Nalnida about Champaklalji and Nalnida about him. So because he is living in that realm of knowledge, he says, what is the difference between me and Champaklal? They are one. Or that because he took that approach. And each of them, and the classical example again, since we are at it, was Nalnida and Amrita. That's why it is so difficult to formulate this yoga into this way or that way. As we know, their rooms are next to each other. The one where right now Manojda sits, that's Nalnida's room. And next to it, there is a room that is where Amrita used to stay. And they were very good friends, at least for a long time, even later on. But later on, they would hardly be seen together. But they would come out together and walk to the dining room, and so different natures. With Nalnida always straight, concentrated, won't probably notice if somebody smiled or said anything. Amrita would be looking here, there, hello, hi, bye. Both were beautiful children of the mother. So this is how each would offer. And they were all obviously incarnations or manifestations of certain divinities. Mother spoke of that. In Amrita, she spoke about the Brahma's consciousness which was being put into him. In Nalnida, Varuna, the vast. So it's a very clear example, and yet they were best of friends, but completely different natures.
They asked Nalnida, where do you live? He said in the overmind and sometimes a little higher.
And equally it would be true of Amrita, but very differently. Somebody would knock his door, Nalnida would open, yes. So you don't know what to say. You can't just, you can't just casually go and, And if you don't know what to say, then door will be closed. Unless, of course, he knows you and, With Amrita, the door is always open. So much so that when he left the body, all the workers in the ashram, they cried. He would be welcoming everyone, anyone. Very rarely one saw him, and that too he would say so humorously. The famous story where there was a person who would always be complaining, wanting to send this to the mother and that. Amrita used to take. So one day when he came, Amrita took the files and was going away. So he asked, when will you be back? He said, when you would have gone. That is the maximum curtness that you could. I will come back when you have gone. Every day you are coming and complaining. But otherwise he would be always welcoming. But both What heights? Mother remarked about on one side to Nalnida. Nalini is not following the path, then who is?
Yes.
For Amrita, the first and the last manager of the ashram. What trust she had in him.
Yes.
She has written that. He is the only manager of the ashram, the first and the last. So these were all examples of, beings who had reached this plane and became manifestations. But because the goal here is supermind. That's why when you go to Casanova, I don't know if some of the people have gone or not here. Casanova is a very interesting place. Whose samadhis are there? Not only the Satya Karma, and the mother has written Faithful One, Amrita, all these people's samadhi is there.
Udar, Mona.
Udar. If you go there, they are not ordinary beings, they are great beings. Pavitrada, I mean, it's unimaginable. But because you have the supramental sun here, otherwise each samadhi would become a, visitor's place where they would, and it's a very different feel, different experience.
Yes. Yes.
But because you have Sri Aurobindo and the mother, the supramental sun. Yet were there regions where these absolutes met. So each Godhead is an absolute in its own right. And yet it has its own empire. And made a circle of bliss with married hands. Light stood embraced by light. Fire wedded fire. But none in the other would his body lose to find his soul in the world's single soul. So we have this in Indian thought about you have Brahma, you have Vishnu and Mahesh. Then you also have Trimurti, where all the three have become one. They are one deity, but in different manifestations of one.
But here they won't.
Here they won't. They won't fuse into each other because it's not possible there. A multiplied rapture of infinity. Onward he passed to a diviner sphere. It's a divine sphere, but he must go beyond. There, joined in a common greatness, light and bliss, all high and beautiful and desirable powers, forgetting their difference and their separate reign, become a single multitudinous whole. So that's where Ashupati must go. Above the parting of the roads of time, that's the joining lit between the lower hemisphere and the higher hemispheres. Above the silence and its thousandfold words. So if you take it from the yogic point of view, beyond the Sahasrara, in the immutable and inviolate truth, forever united and inseparable, the radiant children of eternity dwell on the white spirit height where all are one. This is what we read even in the Savitri camp, that our original future with the Jivatma, with the Divine Mother lying on the lap. So there is no quarrel. But here we quarrel. So, but because there is a plane where there is no quarrel, where each one of us has his own part to fulfill in the grand orchestra. That is why it is possible to have it here one day, sooner than later. This ends Canto 12. Now it's very interesting because often about these cantos, heavens of the ideal, self of mind, the world soul, greater knowledge, people have a natural tendency, all of us, to compare it with, let's say, even Sri Aurobindo's thought. He must mention something or in the traditional yoga. Now very interesting, in the book Savitri, you have very few times mention of the word yoga. Of course, this is a book of yoga, that apart. But very few times there is a mention of the word yoga. As far as I remember, the word Brahman, so sacred to Indian thought, you won't find a mention here. But why is it so? My understanding is, Because these words over a period of time lost their original sense. So anybody who experienced some peace, self-realization, oh, I have found Brahman. So, like the other day, quite some time back, I was reading one of the articles by a big man in, okay, let me not name because it's a very beautiful movement, but a big man who writes about what is Vijnanmay. So he says Vijnanmay is the intellectual mind. So from Vijnanmay you go to bliss. So some joy you experience and you feel you are in the Anandamay. Now, the problem is when we try to equate these terms today, they have lost their meaning because the experience that is put into them, after all, word is a means to communicate an experience, that's all. Now, what is that experience? Sri Aurobindo himself says that initially even I mistook the overmind to be the supermind. And Mother says this, it is so dazzling that it's easy for anyone to believe that it is not the ultimate truth, because we have seen, absolutes, each power. So that is why he has kept away these terms and he is giving us the experience. Now, when you have the experience, you understand it is not necessary.
Yes.
The soul is not keen to know anybody. Like when Mother was asked, how do I know that I have found my soul? She'll say, as long as you have the question, you have not found it. When you find it, you don't get a light flashing, oh, this is my soul. It's not like beep, now you got it. You got it, but it's not like a word which comes to you. It's not like a definition that comes to you. So it is a state in which you know you are immortal. You can get your past lives. You know that there is a spontaneous knowledge. There is peace and joy. There is a spontaneous turning of everything to the divine. That is the state in which the soul is. Now it's not like there will be suddenly a, word. Similarly, they'll not like somebody will say, okay, now you are in overmind. A God will appear and say, now you are in overmind. Very soon you will enter into supermind. So that's why we see that very beautifully. He uses these words very rarely. And very often if one wants to know, orient oneself where one is standing, what it means, it's not enough to read the beginning. It's important to read the end of the canto and what is going to follow. So there we'll see a clue. So this canto 13 in the self of mind. Now how it has been, I have understood it. Canto, because they go in 3 packs. Now you have canto 13, 14 and 15. So 13 is one route one takes and one discovers the vast impersonality which can be taken for the self or a Brahman experience, but it is still a reflection of that state in the mental realm. One is not out of the mind. One is still in the mind, but experiences that state of utter stillness. That's why there are 2 different experiences being described. Whereas in the world soul, it is the cosmic consciousness all embracing. It is the universal divine, very clearly as you read through the experience, which is again the overmind consciousness. But the 2 are dissociated there. On one side, the formless, on the other side, there is the form. So, at that plane, in classical Indian literature, it is Nirgun and Sagun Brahman. It is also called as Brahman. But all the great yogis knew that one has to go beyond. There is still a very thin veil of division, depending on the angle of approach. So, I take it like this, that Sri Aurobindo approached it through this angle, which is there in his own. So he goes into the self of mind and discovers the other side of the reality. And then he climbs beyond. To climb beyond, the greater knowledge is where he stands on the head of the overmind, at the gates where he is going to enter into all that is transcendent, which means supermind and everything else. So this is how I understand these 3 cantos which go together. It's not like now next level is in the self of mind. No. You have reached the apex of the mind. Now what next? The mind will get into a state of vast impersonality, which is what, let's say, a Buddha experiences. And that is called as self-realization. You have not gone into the supramental, but you have entered into a state of total stillness and absolute powerful stillness, because all the powers which are in the, let's say, heavens of the ideal, the great God, they are absorbed within oneself. Yet it is the domain of the mind, but mind where you have the reflection of the highest. So that's why in this self of mind, at last there came a bare indifferent sky. So again we see it's a state of consciousness which is being described, where silence listened to the cosmic voice, but answered nothing to a million calls. The soul's endless question met with no response. It's that yogis experience this state. It's very easy to take it as a Brahman state. Sri Aurobindo who qualified it. In evening talks, for example, he says, yes, he had realization, but in the mind. No, until then, at least I didn't know that there is something like that there can be a mental reflection of the experience. But if we look at nature, it is so evident. You have reflection of the sun on the great mountain peaks, which is very beautiful and powerful. You have reflection of the moon in still calm waters. So that's how it is described, that if the mind becomes completely quiet, it reflects that state. So this is a reflection in the mind of that.
It's interesting that more than interesting, bare indifferent sky.
Yes. So there is, but if you want to know the true state, it will come in the unknowable. But here it is a reflection in the mind. An abrupt conclusion ended eager hopes. So all these beings who went into this state and didn't touch the supermind, they said, yes, there are great gods, there are all kinds of energies, powers. That's the difference between Hinyan and Mahayana Buddhism. But ultimately, at the end of it, it's a blank nothingness, a signless emptiness. It's the end point where you can reach. A deep cessation in a mighty calm, a finish line on the last page of thought, and a margin and a blank of wordless peace. Huh? Yes. But it is what Mother has used the word mental nirvana. And she has qualified it. She has said there is a mental nirvana, there is a vital nirvana, there is even a nirvana in the physical. We are so fortunate, that Mother and Sri Aurobindo, otherwise one can easily, these states actually you encounter in the course of yoga. I mean, I'm sure all of us or many of us encounter it. And if you have this background, you can easily feel, I have arrived, self-realization.
Yeah.
But it's not self-realization in the highest sense. It is only a reflection of that vast impersonal Brahman into the realm of the mind. There paused the climbing hierarchy of worlds. So you have gone beyond the worlds. But actually you are still the lower hemisphere apex. What lies beyond? The yogis didn't bother. They said lies beyond, just annul yourself in that. He stood on a wide arc of summit space, alone with an enormous self of mind, which held all life in a corner of its vast. All creation is appearing like it's in a corner. And you are on top of space, wide summit space. Beyond it, the sense is that there is no space. You're beyond space and time. And yet, you see how powerful and how high one can climb even in the mental world. Of course, the peak of the mental. So we should not, it's a great experience, but it's not the final experience, though it looks like a finished line. Omnipotent, immobile and aloof. In the world which sprang from it, it took no part. It gave no heed to the paeans of victory. It was indifferent to its own defeats. It heard the cry of grief and made no sign. Impartial fell its gaze on evil and good. It saw destruction come and did not move. So, when one is in this state of mind, and if somebody asked about creation, world, why it is there, they'll say this question is meaningless. It is the Brahman. What is all this? This is Maya. How Maya came into existence, it is a meaningless question. You arrive at that state where there is no question. Actually, there is no question, no answer. It's a cessation. So all this, when you reach there, it appears like a meaningless play. That's why the Mayavadin is true in his own experience. And that was Sri Aurobindo's reply, one of the replies. He says, Mayavadin is true in his own experience, but what can I do if I had the experience and then went beyond? So he says that I have to be true to the experience that I have had. Because that was his quest. But if the quest is only to escape, that's good enough. You eventually realize, yes, there is a state in which all this ceases. It appears like a toy game which is happening. Why are you concerned about what's happening there and why it came? You are out of it. And you can help others come out of it. That's the end of the story.
He even expresses in one letter to, I'll use the word disciple, who is positing his own view of the yoga. And Sri Aurobindo says, this is totally against my experience.
Yes, I'm aware. So, it's a state through which one passes. And one should know it's a state. That's it, not the end of the journey. An equal cause of things, a lonely seer, and master of its multitude of forms. It acted not, but bore all thoughts and deeds. The witness Lord of nature's myriad acts, consenting to the movements of her force. His mind reflected this vast quietism. So the mind becomes quiet and it gives equal assent to good and bad. It's beyond good and evil. But it has not solved the mystery. It has just gone beyond good and evil. And in that state it reposes. It doesn't matter. There are yogins like that. And it doesn't concern them. They don't judge anything. They are sarva-sakshi, witness self. A lot of Vipassana is about this. Vipassana training is now what is being practiced in the name of it is different. 10-day course and you pay up an amount, you sign up and you learn to be quiet by inner witnessing. Someone once told me it is Sri Aurobindo's yoga. So I said, why? He said, no, because you have to have the stillness first. I said, which stillness are you speaking about? This is not stillness. This witnessing is not. It will help to make the being calmer and quieter. These are the limits. And it helps in health. There is no doubt about it. Because if you withdraw the mind which is into the form and processes of things, it's a great vantage point. A lot of suffering is because the mind has gone into the play. So it completely withdraws. So when you observe, you become an observant witness. This is a different route that is taken. So to an extent, you develop a certain degree of mastery over nature. It's very different from, that stillness of which Sri Aurobindo speaks. And I said, what about the mother? That is the interesting part. So in this, there is a line which says, our sweet and mighty mother was not there. Because there is no power there is power but is withheld inside. So, we'll come to that line. I think it's toward the end. This witness hush is the thinker's secret base. Hidden in silent depths, the word is formed. From hidden silences, the act is born. Into the voiceful mind, the laboring world, in secrecy wraps the seed, the eternal sows. Silence, the mystic birthplace of the soul. So it has all emerged from silence, gone into the play, and it will come back into the silence. But the actual birthplace of the soul is still beyond. It is portion of the Divine Mother. But here, that is how the whole experience is. We'll read these 4 lines, then we will stop. In God's supreme withdrawn and timeless hush, A seeing self and potent energy met. The silence knew itself and thought took form. Self made from the dual power, creation rose. So, if you ask these yogis how creation has come into being, another way that they use is another term that they use is the mind. It is the mind that emerged out of the silence, thought, and it created a whole
It created
universe.
everything.
That is how they will say.
Yes.
Others will say Maya. That's how Sri Aurobindo spends a whole chapter in the Life Divine. The overmind Maya. So, this is where we'll stop.